Hi, I'm Peter Huessy. I'm Director of Strategic Deterrence Studies at the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies. Over the course of today, we've largely focused on modernization, the future systems that will replace the current Minuteman III missile. We rely today to deter potential adversaries around the world. And while we wait for those systems to be ready, we have to sustain the nuclear force we have today. The older systems get, the harder it is to keep them ready at all times. Parts in the supply chain are a struggle, so is finding the talent to work on these legacy technologies. So let's get into the business of logistics, workforce, contracting, and programs, and talk about what it takes to sustain a capable and credible ICBM fleet in its twilight years. Joining me are Darrell, the I2SC Program Manager, Ted Kerzie, Program Director of Strategic Deterrence Systems and Missile and Weapons Systems Defense, Space, and Security at the Boeing Company, and Randy Tymofichuk, who is Director of Sales and Business Development and an advisor to ManTech. Thank you all for joining me today. And let's look at past sustainment. Once cost-effective, such as the GRP and PRP, is now getting very expensive, particularly with respect to the robustness of the supply chain. In general, sustainment, let's begin with a 2-minute opener from each of you on the challenge that we're facing to sustain the people, processes, and technology needed to keep Minuteman III credible. Let's start with Darrell, and then we'll go to our friend from Boeing, and then from Randy. Go ahead, Darrell.
Thanks, Peter. Well, you know, what's interesting, before I assumed the position of president of the Integrated ICBM Support Services Company, I was a member of the senior leadership that managed and operated Y-12 and Pantex, delivering the LEPs for the overall triad, or as General Temple called it, the weapons system. I bring that up because it's identically close to the situation we're here to talk about today, sustainment and complementing modernization. So when you talk about people, one of the things we found out there, and I know we're going to see and are seeing as it relates to the overall ICBM, is the definition of the workforce. And that definition's changed over time. Today, it clearly is the current workforce, but it's also the STEM individuals that are in elementary and high school that have an opportunity to be a part of this mission. It is the university graduates that we're working to bring in as interns and then hire into the mission. And it's the retirees who can bring knowledge transfer into the system to help the overall workforce be better than it was. From a process standpoint, one of the biggest opportunities is continuous process improvement from the bottom up versus the top down directed. I think that's going to be a great opportunity as we look at Minuteman III and sustainment and providing that knowledge transfer to the GBSD ICBM. The third item is technology. While we have to move to model-based systems engineering, clearly I think we all recognize that it has to be done in a balanced transition and an integrated management approach to be successful. So combine those three together is an experience I've had that allowed us to be successful in meeting the mission that we owed NNSA and the overall military as far as our triad. And I think it's an opportunity for us to demonstrate those same opportunities here on the ICBM directorates. Thank you.
Thank you, Darrell. We'd like to turn it over to our colleague from Boeing.
Yeah, first off, thanks, Peter and the AFA for having me today. It's very important to talk about this subject and sustaining Minuteman into the future. I agree with Darrell. It's all about people. The key for us has been people and has always been and having the right people. If you don't have the right talent, you can't deliver on the other two, processes and technologies. So there are really two challenges in that effort. Is one, the overall available talent pool and attracting and retaining that talent. The talent pool being a bit competitive here in the northern Utah area. It's difficult now, but we're doing well in attracting and retaining those folks. We're also looking at the different flexible work arrangements that we found out work in the last year and a half, attracting the right talent to the workforce. We're also, of course, working with local out-of-state universities as well as the STEM projects to grow the eventual talent pool that will come to this industry. Really, new technology comes and goes. So we're working on an old technology, but really what kind of remains constant in the workforce is your culture and drawing a clear line with those for those employees to the overall mission. And I think that is key in retaining and attracting talent to your workforce. It's really connecting team to that mission and then giving them opportunities to thrive and grow in their careers. I think we offer that for 100 employees across the Minuteman weapon system. It's a great weapon system to work on. Again, having the right people. Once you have the right people, is having the right knowledge transfer programs in place in order to transfer that knowledge from the experienced employees to the new employees coming into the Minuteman weapon system, and then keeping it fresh. Right, so we have several modernization programs that we're working on Minuteman, namely the ICBM Crypto Upgrade Program Phase 2 and the Flight Test and Telemetry Program, or FT3. Those are really bringing new technologies into the Minuteman mission, and it has helped in retaining the talent and giving exciting programs to work on.
Okay, again, let me reiterate, from Ted's acknowledgement, I'd like to thank Peter and the Air Force Association for really hosting this. I think this is a key discussion point as a career logistician. I'm excited to see, kind of sustainment at the forefront of the discussion piece, because there are a lot of challenges we have to deal with out there. I mean, certainly from a Caterpillar perspective, we deal with that every day. Again, looking at people, processes, and in the technology component of this, we're all facing many of the similar challenges as we kind of walk through this. But I would say that from a people perspective, not to go over the same ground again, but knowledge management, knowledge transfer. Again, I think as we've went through the last 14 months, I think we've discovered how to open the aperture a little bit, trying to leverage on different components of technology. And I truly believe that experience is going to help us go forward, particularly when we get into some of the challenges of competing locally. You hear this constantly in terms of the Utah dynamic, whether it was discussed previously out of Colonel Bartolome in the previous session. But again, it's trying to maintain those challenges to attract the right kind of workforce back into to ICBMs. And certainly GBSD has, for the most part, had a lot of success in that arena. The challenge areas are really going to be working on the older technology, like Minuteman III. I would say from a process perspective, we've made a lot of significant progress, I think, from managing through some of our supply chain processes, having went through some of the challenge lessons we learned after 2008, how we established some of the nuclear weapons related material process. I think has helped us a lot from a supply chain perspective. And then, finally, I'd kind of like to emphasize too, what we've done in digital engineering and putting sustainment at the forefront of that discussion point, I think is critical in terms of moving forward, not only for GBSD, but also for Minuteman III, leveraging on, some of those key technology concepts out there to really kind of help us protect our systems, design our systems. It is just really interesting in terms of some of the things that Northrop and the government are doing right now in the digital engineering space, and that's pretty exciting. And I'm glad they're putting sustaining engineering and sustainment at the forefront of that discussion point.
Thank you very much, Randy. Let's go to our second question, and that is some of the challenges we're facing. I'd like to start again with Darrell. What are the primary programmatic challenges to sustaining the ICBM enterprise that we're now facing?
Well, clearly, front and foremost is sustained and consistent funding. That's been a challenge. We've discussed that across many of the other discussions earlier this morning. And that has to be maintained to be able to keep the trajectory of not just the sustainment, but the modernization activity going on as well. The second thing is, while the supplier chain has been improved, as Randy spoke to earlier, I think all of us recognize it's got to be expanded to be able to meet up and stay with the demands that are going to be a part of the going forward requirements of sustainment, and the DMIL activities will be associated with that, but the significant modernization activities with GBSD and the opportunity to perhaps leverage like vendors across both directorates would be ideal. A third item is, quite frankly, focus. And that's by the respective vendors and OEMs and SEI vendors that are participating. In other words, we all have specific roles to play. And the more we can stay in that swim lane and do that job with excellence and in a collaborative fashion, the more successful the overall mission will be. And it allows us to avoid conflicts of interest. So I think that's a significant opportunity, challenges, but opportunities.
Thank you. And let's turn it over to Mr. Kerzie.
I agree with Darrell on his first point, and General Ray said it this morning, and I'll quote him. He said, we need to give the airmen a fighting chance. Right, so on Minuteman, it's all about, and it will be about funding and attention to the Minuteman weapon system. And overcoming those obsolescence challenges and risks, that the unknown unknowns, right? So we're going to have things that happen that still need to be fixed in Minuteman to sustain it for the next 20 years before GBSD comes online. So we really need to keep that focus on both sustainment O&M dollars as well as any additional modification programs that will eliminate those risks.
Randy, over to you, sir.
Thanks, Peter. I think as we go down the funding trail, and certainly, those are unique dynamics that you have to deal with within the Beltway. But, the triad itself and nuclear modernization needs to continue to be a key press. My concerns become what will be available for sustainment dollars priority shift. I think we see some of that from an Army perspective right now, where the emphasis has been on what are you going to do for research and development, and again, does sustainment take a kind of a backseat out of that? And again, how can we more effectively maintain the enterprises as we try to sustain, particularly in the realm of the Minuteman III program? We went through some experiences in mid 2000 timeframe, I think, as we kind of worked through, driving, the propulsion replacement program. We were driving the propulsion system rocket engine program, and again, Mark 21, life extension out there. And I think, we met some interesting challenges. How are we going to maintain our core and common workload out there for statutory authority? How do we do that partnering that's going to be more cost effective? I think from both the industry perspective and the government requirements that sit out there, it's going to be certainly an interesting time. But I think we have the benefit, I think, of some historical lessons learned out there that I think will really be helpful to us as we kind of move forward with sustainment activities in the future.
Thank you very much. Let's turn to another topic having to do with infrastructure, and I'll go through the question is, what are the most serious logistical challenges to sustaining an aging infrastructure? And again, let's start with Darrell and then go through our two other guests.
Well, the first major challenge, quite frankly, is integrating three activities going on in the same physical space and with many of the same resources. And that is, you have a mission which is active, you have to be performing. You have recapitalization, modernization activities going on, and you have preventive maintenance or predictive maintenance going on. That has to be integrated to be able to die correctly with no impact to the mission and 24/7 alert posture that this mission has to be in at all times. And there's a way that can be done. In fact, if I look back at my most recent experience with the explosives system, where we had to increase the amount of LEP production to the triad, while we were doing 30% year-over-year recapitalization increase and 35% predictability maintenance and lower the cost at the same time. That can be done if you put the systems in place and you put the training in place. Because culturally, people have, in many cases, not only following the procedure and process, but they have a little bit of tribal knowledge that they follow. So we have to go through, I think, a process of educating our workforce on how to work in an integrated fashion to get effectiveness, but maintain at all times the safety, security, and quality position they have to have. And last but not least, bringing that supplier base in where they can be a focused entity and a force multiplier for us in some cases is another attribute that I think we'll want to continue to look at and expand upon.
Mr. Kerzie.
Yeah, kind of along the same lines as my last response. I mean, there's I think General Genetep was the one that said it. There's unknown unknowns out there, right? There's risks to the Minuteman weapon system and getting it to the late 2030s. There's things out there that we aren't aware of, and we need to look forward and ensure that we have an approach to respond to those risks. And that's all about making sure there's a robust supply chain, looking in advance to see if there's ways to reduce obsolescence risk in a systematic approach, and ensuring that Minuteman stays viable through the late 2030s. So we got to take a proactive approach, looking at issues that are out in front of us. We got to look at the data through Colonel Quigley and General Genetep's digital sustainment thrust to make sure that we're doing the right trend analysis, make sure that we've got those approaches in place.
Thank you. And now over to you, Randy.
Yeah, and again, I think some of the key challenges and issues we're going to face, as we've learned historically out there, is accommodating, large scale modernization program. This one will be unique from the perspective that, we're going to be trying to field maintain and field two weapon systems at the same time. So, again, as you look at, some of the key elements that we went through the first time around with programs like PRP and PISRI is really kind of how do we manage and navigate that storage aspect out there from a weapons perspective? How do we manage the storage aspect of it, from an explosive perspective, and then how are we going to manage through some of the unique dynamics of transportation requirements? Again, we're going to put different demands and different requirements, I think, from a fielding perspective out there, and not only from the transportation from, whatever the locations are for GBSD, but, how are you going to manage this with the legacy systems out there on the payload transporters? And I know the government's looking at that pretty closely. You've got some considerations on roads and bridges. Again, those factors have come in as Northrop and the government have looked at the GBSD requirements. And I think, when we get into managing critical aspects of trying to maintain the original sites out there, how do we effectively overlay, a key program, depot maintenance schedule out there, and how do we integrate that with corresponding deployment for what the OEM is going to do in terms of laying that out. And again, it's trying to synchronize those schedules, because an interruption in one is going to have an impact on all of our schedules out there, whether it be our day-to-day maintenance schedule for Minuteman 3 or the deployment schedule for GBSD. So I think there has to be key synchronization for those efforts and effects out there.
Thank you very much. A very related question is my next area, that the security but surety of the contractor base in the supply chain are a major concern. And what I'd like to do is have Darrell address this to begin with. Do we have the supply chain we need for strategic missiles for the 21st century? Is it going to be secure enough, and is the surety going to be there?
Well, the answer is yes, but. And the but side of it is the suppliers and vendors can only be as successful as we give them the forecast and the predictability of where the components and systems are that are going to be needed, replaced in the sustainment arena. That can be done by the model-based systems engineering acceleration into the sustainment portfolio, and the predictability with AI and ML in our maintenance activities to allow us to get ahead of the requirements and provide those to the vendors. The second thing is requirements. They've got to be complete. They've got to be accurate, and they got to be timely around the functional operations that are expected to be performed. That's not always the case. In fact, you heard earlier today, General Ray talk about some of the drawings don't even exist any longer for the MM3. We've got to work through that. And last but not least, I would suggest we consider forming a partners in excellence approach with our suppliers, much like we would do a partners in excellence with our Air Force. That allows us to talk in an open forum. What are the things we're seeing that are challenging them being responsive to our needs, and what are the things they're seeing that are being impediments to them accomplishing that? I think that's in front of us.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Mr. Kerzie.
Yeah, I think the answer to the question is most definitely, I think we do have the supply chain in place. And the key to that is to ensure that you're looking forward. As I said earlier, the risks within the weapon system, as well as any obsolescence issues. So I'll give you a real life example. In the NS-50 guidance system for Minuteman III, over the last 20, 30 years, we've been using, I'll quote unquote, digital sustainment, as Colonel Quigley and General G talks about, to make sure that we are foreseeing those issues or obsolescence issues, right? So, and in the guidance system and the program depot maintenance, we're seeing the highest reliability ever of that system, and the system has parts that are older than I am. So it works if we've got the foresight and the planning in place to ensure that we've got the risks and obsolescence issues covered.
Thank you. Over to you, Randy.
Yeah, I think, you know, I'm kind of optimistic in terms of, you know, what we've done from, you know, that latter part of the 2008 timeframe. But I think we've made some significant progress in effectively managing supply chain, particularly from a nuclear weapons related material perspective. Supply chain risk management, again, is going to be a key focus for a lot of companies across the entire spectrum. I know the things that we look at from Caterpillar in terms of what goes on there from supply chain. But I think that the good thing is it's helped driven more process discipline. It's helped us drive more viability for sourcing out there. Again, you know, we have executive orders that have come out that have talked about Buy America Act requirements, trade agreement requirements, and these aren't new. You know, we've had to deal with these before, but I think we're going to have to drive a lot more rigor over the next several years to make sure that, you know, we maintain, you know, those key requirements. And again, securing second source requirements out there, those will be critical to make sure that we have the right content going forward. It's going to be a challenging time over the next several years, and it's good to see that we're dealing with a lot of that up front right now. So,
thank you, Randy. Our next subject area is going to be the workforce. Now, as we modernize and sustain the infrastructure, what are the key challenges for modernizing and sustaining a talented workforce? But that includes not only throughout the remainder of the Minuteman III deployment, but that of the new GBSD. So, Darrell, over to you. That's a tough one.
Well, it is, but let's kind of break it down a little bit. In my opening comments, I talked about a redefining of the workforce and what that's made up of. I want to add to that, maybe the next generation workforce has to be trained better and differently. And let me talk to how we might do that. You heard General Jen Temple talk earlier today, where he was in discussions and meetings with children and students in STEM programs who had no idea about this mission. I believe there's an opportunity to incorporate that group into a life cycle of training for future employees, to leverage the STEM as an opportunity for them to grow, because it's clearly one of the most critical attributes this country needs right now. But also share with them the opportunity to be involved in a mission that's in their backyard they may have not known about. And more importantly, it's one of the key reasons why they have the freedom that we have in this nation. The second thing is work in a more robust framework with the universities to develop interns and next generation graduates coming out of the universities in line with the forecast need across the entire directorate complex. For the incumbents, or those that are working there today, develop a training program that allows them to gather new training relevant to moving forward and how we're going to maintain and sustain, and also how they could get graduate degrees to grow in their career. And last but not least, retirees. I mentioned that in the beginning. They have knowledge transfer that is eminently important to us in leadership development, in mission criticality, operations, technology. Let's give those men and women, those servicemen and women, an opportunity to be a participant in training those next generation workforce individuals. The second thing you have to do is inform some kind of a structure or that process actually work. We believe that could be done by standing up an ICBM university. That is a collaboration with some of the attributes I just talked about. And last but not least, I'll be honest with you, in many years I've been in this business, traditionally when we were hiring people, we did it ourselves, which I had the pleasure of working many years with Lockheed Martin, and now I'm a part of the Leidos Corporation, and now I'm running my own company. And what I have found, those are good people with good processes, but they have a lot of things on their plate. How about bringing on a company that's focused, is a national known entity on how you recruit, how you staff, how you qualify to bring people in to that training and educational process to make them mission ready on day one. I think that's the opportunity for all of us to consider as we move forward, to make sustainment affordable and bringing more mission on the dollars that are being expended.
Well, over to you, Mr. Kerzie, in particular, from the perspective of a company like Boeing, how do you see that challenge?
Yeah, so we're definitely involved in STEM, working with local universities, things like Darrell had mentioned. We've got programs where we bring brand new or high school students, college students in during the summer. Of course, we hook them up with folks that know Minuteman and how to sustain Minuteman. So key to retaining and sustaining that talented workforce is really knowledge transfer. I really believe in that. So we've got within Boeing, we've got young employees or interns really working side by side with the I'll call them graybeards, people that are experts in how we did things 30 years ago. So even if you're developing a new weapon system, or you're sustaining an old weapon system, there are lessons learned or approaches that we've had that we've leveraged, along the way that are 20 to 30 years old. There's no substitute for decades of experience, technical expertise, and proven results. So it is really key to get those experienced employees sitting with the younger employees that are coming through the system, so we can transfer that knowledge and we're not learning the mistakes of the past. General Way that talked about something earlier about a careful blend of sustainment and developmental engineering. So that's what we have within Minuteman currently, and definitely within the Boeing sustainment programs. So we've got a level of sustainment for Minuteman, but on top of that, we've got some developmental engineering. And I talked about two of several programs we've got, ICU2 or the crypto upgrade program, and FT3, which is replacing the functionality for flight tests. So those provide engineers an opportunity to do, maybe they're more excited in the development aspect of the life cycle than the sustainment aspect. So that gives them a chance to move between programs and learn different techniques, expand their knowledge and skills, and grow them as an employee.
Thank you very much. Randy, over to you, sir.
Thanks, Peter. Again, as we had mentioned earlier, and I think it was a comment that Ted had made about what the last 14 months have really taught us out there. But the GBSD attraction, I think, has been good for the Valley. But again, we understand that there is a competitive market out there. The Silicon Slopes certainly has driven a lot of demand requirements on the resource challenges. So how do we bring those key components to help us support efforts like digital engineering? And I think really you're going to have to open the aperture. You're going to have to think a little bit differently, I think, from a challenge perspective, to make sure that you can meet those things. And it's going to challenge the conventional wisdom in terms of how both government and industry have tried to deal with that. I think you're attracting new market entrants out there. ManTech has been one of those that has tried to leverage and bring in different components and expertise out there. So, we need to make sure that we're staying open-minded. We bring that resource challenge, and as all of us have mentioned before, knowledge management and knowledge transfer will be critical for us. I mean, we have a lot of gray beards out there that will be key to leverage on their resource expertise. It is certainly, from a Minuteman III perspective, critical for what we're doing as we move into the future. And we need to make sure that we capture that critical knowledge and information out there that will be relative to supporting Minuteman III and eventually GBSD as we move forward.
Subject to the question of digital engineering. As you know, the legacy Minuteman force is an analog world, and digitized is the future. Could you, starting with Darrell, could you help explain how digital engineering and modeling will change the outlook for future multiple decade sustainment, particularly given the fact that this next round of modernization is going to last for half a century?
Yeah. Good question. Let me start off with 5 attributes that every mission is focused on: cost, schedule, quality, safety, security. What does that have in common with model-based systems engineering and a digital engineering environment? It allows us to move into a virtual environment prior to moving into the legacy or traditional physical environment to do simulations, to do predictability, consequently driving improvements in all 5 of those attributes. That is critical for us to recognize the opportunity of using that, as we recognize the administration, Congress, and the Air Force are constantly going to be up against headwinds on affordability. It's our opportunity to use this model-based systems engineering, as they're already doing GBSD, and they're expanding into Minuteman III, to take that even further with our workforce. That's the opportunity in front of us, and that's the opportunity we have to take a hold of.
Thank you, Darrell. Now I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Kerzie from Boeing.
Yeah, there's some folks out there that say, hey, this is an old weapon system, why would you do MBSE? Well, there's a couple reasons. One, that's how the current workforce thinks, and that's how the young folks are coming into the business, is they're thinking about those things, and that's the way they think, that's the way they work. So we have to, as old folks, have to adapt to that, right? So the people that have been doing this for years, and basically, we're all in on digital engineering. So we're already doing aspects of that in our guided sustainment activities, where we're modeling the NS50 guidance system, and that's shown some benefits. We've already implemented digital engineering on our, as I mentioned earlier, the FT3 program and our ICU2 program, and those are allowing the young folks and the more experienced folks to come together in a common language and understanding the system. One of the things I'm really excited about is, and I'll coin it digital sustainment. I think this is what General Tempo and Colonel Quigley were getting at earlier. When I came into the ICBM business in the 2008 timeframe, it was really surprising to be on how much data was not available from the weapon system. And the key to doing digital sustainment for Minuteman III is getting that data into one repository that can be used to look at future problems. So that digital engineering or that digital sustainment will help us maintain Minuteman III into the future. So excited at that thrust, and we're all in on this.
Sir, Randy.
Thanks, Peter. Just kind of highlighting what Ted had mentioned here. The data element, I think, is going to be critical. As you look at having the capacity and capability to do condition-based maintenance. We track 1 million machines worldwide. Again, that data element that is critical for us to drive those data decisions is crucial, I think, in terms of what we do. I think, with digital engineering, you got to remember there are 3 aspects of digital engineering. There's as designed, as built, and then of course as maintained out there. And it will be very important for us to kind of leverage on the key components of what we're doing for GBSD, any backwards compatibility that we can leverage on Minuteman 3. But again, as we go forward, not only in Minuteman 3, it's going to be very important to do that and leverage on those digital engineering efforts, from GBSD into Minuteman 3 to help us, manage and sustain as we go forward in the future. And again, we're leveraging on, on that whole component. Sustainment is generally only thought of in terms of, the day-to-day environment. I think sustainment needs to be a critical part of, the decision process when we acquire systems out there. It's got to be in the forefront.
Much. We come to another subject, and that is cybersecurity. And one of the questions comes up is, how does the high-threat cyber environment affect the sustainment challenge to the NC3 requirements for Minuteman 3? Darrell, let's start with you on that.
Well, we're all aware of the cyber breaches that have occurred, and we actually talked about earlier today in one of the other sessions in our meat packing processing facilities in the Colonial Pipeline. Who would have ever thought, right? Well, that cybersecurity risk is even more dynamic, more real as it relates to the NC3 area and this mission as a whole, whether it be the NC3 part of the mission, the delivery vehicle, and or the explosives. And we're moving to model-based systems engineering with authoritative sources, and they're going to be at risk if we don't have a strong, rigorous cyber approach and technologies wrapped around that. So it kind of brings us back to three things that intersect as they did at the beginning. The first item is people. People want to do the right thing when it relates to cyber, but they've got to be trained. They've got to be trained through processes that show them how to improve on how that cyber is going to be sustained. And they've got to be given enabling technology that helps them to do that in a better fashion. So I think when we bring what we started this dialogue off with to bear on the cyber side, that being people, process, and technologies, we'll accomplish a critical item that has to wrap around everything we're doing, inclusive, by the way, with our supply chain that we need to add and we will be adding on an ongoing basis.
Okay, over to you, Mr. Kerzie from Boeing.
Yeah, I think it's out there. It's a big threat and it's getting worse. So we got to deal with it. And the way the Air Force and Boeing are dealing with it, several modification programs have that cybersecurity layer of requirements on it. So it definitely does add additional complexity to the program, but it's definitely something that's needed in order to lower the threat vectors into the weapon system. I'm confident that industry can do this in Minuteman 3 sustainment. We're partners with the Air Force to make sure that the cyber threat doesn't actually become real within Minuteman. Looking forward to working with the Air Force in the future on cyber.
Thank you very much. Randy, over to you, sir.
Yeah, Peter, it just, the one encouraging aspect of, our weapon system was, it was predicated on nuclear surety. We had these challenges early within the development of the weapon system. We addressed them. We've come up with a pretty robust process. So, when I think of cybersecurity, I think of nuclear surety. Again, that's the fundamental component of, how we provided those protections against vulnerabilities for the weapon system. Granted, there are going to be new dynamics that we're going to have to deal with, in the NC3 world. We will continue to focus, that effort to make sure that we keep the system vulnerabilities protected. And, we'll always have that requirement out there. I just think that, with the talent pool that we have from our engineers, our design, our acquisition professionals, our operators, and our maintainers out there, they're going to continue to do, the right things to help us design and support a system that keeps it cyber hardened. This will be very critical for us in the future.
Come towards the end of our session, but I wanted to give each of our speakers a chance to give a 30-second roundup of their summary before I introduce our next speaker. Go ahead, Darrell.
Well, Peter, I want to thank you for being our moderator today, and I want to thank AFA giving us the chance as a team to talk about something that's so incredibly important to this nation. And I want to build off something that General Jen Temple also said. This is an opportunity we have to consistently build on, ensuring more of the public knows the value of this mission in their lives and are pushing for the sustainment of this and the modernization. That's a big role that they can play for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kerzie from Boeing.
Yeah, so we've been with this weapon system since the beginning of the weapon system, and we'll be there till the end. We are privileged to work with the Air Force in this mission. Again, connecting individuals and employees to the mission is very important, as well as the attention this weapon system will get in the future as GBSD transitions in. Again, the funding will be critical in ensuring that the mission stays viable.
Thank you, sir. And now, Randy.
On mute.
Thank you. Again, I wanted to say thanks to Peter and AFA. Many thanks to Peter for what he's done over the many decades here. But I think, the thought I would leave you with is remember our history. Our history will help us prepare for the future requirements out there. They will help us hopefully eliminate some risk and alleviate the potential for making some errors as we move forward.
Thank you all for participating today.
Where is possible? Past the edge of convention, beyond the boundaries of tomorrow, where no idea is too bold and no challenge too great. It's here where we break free from what is to what could be. Because defining the future is impossible until it's not.
Look, sweetheart, Daddy worked on that.
Wow!
I want your dreams to soar just like that rocket.
From here, we monitor the spacecraft and help the astronauts get home.
Dad, this is awesome.
You can become anything you want, and the sky's the limit.
Do you have what it takes?